Hello and most welcome to H 849. And there is a saying in Swedish, let's weld the iron while it's hot. And it means that while you feel that you are in the flow, do the action then and do not wait. And I will today make an exception from my rule of not recording, well, too much, because it puts a strain on me. Because, well, it's the subject doesn't usually doesn't lend itself to be shortened or quickened. It's a process. But I think it's sort of opened up here the last time, and it's in the opening up of the ideas of this very strict, what can you say, division between subject and object, and this creation of an outside world with its own rules, local rules, so to speak. And one of those local rules are definitely the development of cause and effect. Cause and effect can only come into play once a world has been established, and inside that world cause and effect sort of develops, strengthens. It's getting stronger and stronger, and in this development, this is where you get this firmer view of reality that doesn't lend itself to the same way of movement or leniency. It's solidifying, and the objects are becoming less and less transparent. They are all of a sudden no longer possible to mold, to affect. They become unchangeable. An object is always all of a sudden same to itself. It remains self and it doesn't change. And I think in this process you can see how intention and will disappears slowly and slowly and slowly, step by step. And in the end, will has completely gone. If say will was here, this side, you go with this area and it disappears and it disappears, and all of a sudden you are in this other world governed by cause and effect. And will is out of the picture, and also the possibility of making other choices. Can you see the movement here? Here, will is still working. You go back to the young age here, when you were young, still perceiving the world to be moldable, changeable by the subjective side. You come over more and more to this side, it slowly solidifies, gets more and more solid, and it's hooking on, so to speak. The cogs are hooking onto each other, and here you have an evolved machine where the rule is cause and effect, and that happens all by itself. And going from this way over to this way is also letting go of control, or no longer being able to regulate, have a direction, I would say. Direction ceases here, and in this world, you might call it this world of solidified things governed by cause and effect, out of hand and far away from you, no longer present. And is this very instance the possibility of affecting also disappears. You are no longer in the picture, you're no longer embodied, and when you are here in this area, I hope it shows, where you are here in this area, your body is not in the picture. Knowledge is something completely separated from the body, from what you perceive, and also from what you are thinking in the end. That has no role to play whatsoever. You are no longer inside your own world. You could call that also alienation, complete alienation, stuckness. So it's a world that is lost to you. Richard Rorty mentioned this in his excellent book about the mirror. It's a much simpler book than the Derridian Project. As I said earlier, it is still a lot one can learn from other people's mistakes, and going directly to the source can be too overwhelming because you need to change at the same time. So you need to find the knowledge on the same level. If it's too high up, it will be no connection. But Richard Rorty noted that that is a world at lost, and it's also the book of Nagel, who wrote just about that there is only one world picture today. There's also only one way to perceive science, art, literature, and that's a world that is not here anymore. It's gone, the world is lost. It's playing its own life, and this is what I mean by this being on this side. And now you are in this world, you are a figure in the world. Inside the world you are a figure. And you localize yourself, one could say, with Cartesian coordinates or some other model or tool that doesn't play with yourself and doesn't have yourself inside the idea of reality anymore. Here is everything is playing in itself, and you can also compare that to a domino effect. And as you see, when cause and effect becomes more and more established, what also will happen in this establishing process is linear time. Cause and effect and linear time are intimately connected because they are both suggesting time is outside yourself, only outside yourself. And your perception of time is a second-hand ingredient, something you get second-hand. You don't really have access to it. Here, you have no longer access to time. Time is lost for you. Time is not inventing. Time is no longer creative. This is the death of creativity. This is Edvard de Bono's book. I am right, you are wrong, without a doubt. But this black and white world is also having a special mood to it. And if you try to get into that mood, feel the mood of polarities, how it's draining you of energy. It's a drainage. I mentioned 2 lectures ago that when you are in this situation, you are becoming drained. it's a drainage, it's something that diminishes energy, makes it unfathomable, unreachable. And see also this cause and effect thing that plays out itself. Cogwheels, hooking into cogwheels. See that as a friction and try to perceive that friction. I think early in one yoga, if you do the slow yoga, which I recommend, you will feel it especially in the beginning of the yoga session. And that's a sort of tension, the sort of thoughts popping up, and they are tiresome, they are repetitive, they are draining you of the energy. And that's ki dissipating. I mean, the main reason why it's so very hard to understand ki or prana or chi or whatever you call it from a Western perspective is in our worldview, which is here, over here, move the camera, which is over here, there is no space for it. It's like you replaced all the laws with the prana laws with other laws, cause and effect in your time, and they hook into each other, and there is no room left for prana. And that's why it doesn't work just to say prana is something that exists. You should learn about it. You go to India and you study it. It doesn't work because that system doesn't take it. And what happens if you take in prana anyway? Well, you get a plus. You get an extra that doesn't include into the system. It could be equal with something in that system, and that's why we usually explain prana with energy, which is absolute rot. Couldn't be further from the truth. That is not what prana is. Prana cannot fit this system at all, because that's a self-servant system. It's an economy that Georges Bataille would call it, that is self-sufficient. Doesn't need anything else. It has what it needs. It's like a farm where you grow all the things you need, and you do your hunting, or you have your meat, or you have your cattle, and so forth and so forth, and you don't need anything more. It's a self-contained economy. It's an autopoiesis. It doesn't need anyone else, and therefore if you put prana there, you're just gonna say it's the same as energy, something that already is at work in this system. It's already at work, it's a system. That's why all this addendum, putting into God, soul, Atman, whatever it is you want to play around with, will in this system just directly become equal to. It's the same as, or in a bit rather different to, it has a different qualities to, it doesn't matter, because this system doesn't take it in. You could also say it takes it in and absorbs it, so it disappears. It doesn't have a function because it's sucked up, and by saying something is the same, it's getting sucked up and disappears from vision. It's no longer present. I think that's in the deconstructive project. I think I've been there myself. I can tell from speak for myself. I've been so interested in deconstruction on all the time since I stumbled across Dissemination and all those books. But to really understand it, to go into being able to do it myself, that I realize now is a completely different thing. It couldn't be more different actually. It's you are active, you can do it whenever you want, you can put it whatever method, area, place, circumstance as you want, and that is a lot more freedom. It means I can do it whenever I want to, and it also fits the subject, whereas as I had to do earlier, copy paste from some of Derrida's earlier work and quote or cite it was already taken out of a specific context. Difference can only be in that text, not outside that very text. In that book, the polarities divorce. There is no polarity, there is no difference in general. We cannot, so to speak, make difference universalized. It is in itself not a generalizable thing. Just like emptiness is not a generalizable thing, there's not such a thing as emptiness in itself, or constant being empty of everything and not having a substance. It or when you get out of the picture and when you're no longer in that, and I would say that most people today perceive the world to be something beyond them. As no wonder, one of the most common expressions for reality today is the reality out there. Isn't that in itself really weird to speak in that way? And I think it has its reason. That is how we perceive it. And any theory / method or understanding or gestalt that does not take in the realization why people perceive the world to be out of hand, at large, world at large, as Nagel said, a world that escaped you, a world that is sifting through your hands. Once that is not understood, you will only be treading water, and you don't get anywhere. You're stuck. And this stuckedness, and I think criticizing the system will lead to stuckness. So you have two non-optional choices, non-voluntary choices. Either you could be lured by the idea that if you get everything perfect and you go down to the essence, you'll be able to understand. There's one trick of the mind. The other one, equally as enticing or tempting, is just criticizing, and that won't lead you anywhere other than in the very same position. A criticism is just repeating the same very problem. It doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't develop. I think I need to go into the sun here for a while. It doesn't develop anything, and you are still stuck in the same way. Hello, my friend, how are you? Yes, so Galaxis. You still have the same sort of stuckedness. You don't get anywhere, and you seem to live in a static world where everything is decided in advance for you. And that could be reinforced by the schooling system. Doesn't have to be. And that's very important to understand. There are going to be people who never get stuck in it. They will always remain with will and understanding that they have the intention to change and do whatever they want to. So you could say that deconstruction is something that brings will back into its power, and without deconstruction of the whole text that is the living world, you will not have any will. You will not have the soul. It would be no reason to speak about consciousness or anything like that. because it would be shut out of the picture just because the position of yourself. And the simultaneous movement of deconstruction in this encompassing and global way, you could call it, like the whole world, is that both the subjective and the objective side needs to be loosened up at the same time. And it's a bit, you need to have a double focus. You need to both see what affects, what happens in the world once you are more balanced, when you're sitting better. I'm trying to reach my sitting bone, and I also let space come into the picture. Sitting now at square, and the sheer space around me helps. So especially in the beginning, I can recommend that you see to that there is plenty of space around you. And we usually train yoga and those things in high up elevated places, and the sheer openness help to soften the body, make it expand backwards, forwards and upwards, and don't let out all the space you have around you, because that is very, very helpful to opening up even more. And the more you be able to take in that space, the better it becomes. And that can also be something that leads to that you get more space within knowledge. Knowledge is opening up. Knowledge is not only becoming this compartmentalized position where all knowledge is divided into different subjects, and there are absolute walls in between them that makes it impossible for anything to seep from one position to another. And this is the true dividedness of this takes away closeness and intimacy to knowledge, blocking out of intellectuality and intelligence and wisdom at the same time. So the wisdom of the body is also the wisdom of the mind. The lack of wisdom in the body is lack of wisdom in the mind. And the more you go into the mind, you realize the intimacy between what's outside, how that changes while your mind is changing at the same time. And they start to play with each other. And that's a consorted movement. Remember, I said in the previous lecture that subject and object gets established at the very same time. And that can trick us to think they have always been separate. And that is a big wall, it's a big obstacle, especially in the beginning. But once you soften that up, you will realize there is a connection. And the more you go in it, you notice time changes when you change. When the mind calms down, time also calms down. And you realize the objective pole and the subjective pole are internested. Just like the Russian doll, they are interconnected, they reinforce each other, and they make each other stronger and stronger. So it's a mutual strengthening process, and that continues all the time. And once I think you make that connection to see, well, I was in a absent-minded mood, and that made the world seem more deterministic, more cause and effect erupted. Everything seemed to be playing out in linear time, and it was a flattening out of the objects. They were flat, intransparent, you couldn't look into them. And in all this sort of disappearance of the vividness. This is where you understand that this lack of luster, this lack of brilliance, this lack of color is the very change of mind at the same time. And all of a sudden just, aha, there is a connection between world and mind, and they have a common origin. Or as Jan would say, it's the Klein bottle logic. This is another take on that. It's a deconstructive mood when you are softening up the polarities because they are harsh. It's a sort of harshness in the thinking. And this very harshness is frictionful thinking. It's tough on yourself. It's almost you have a commanding, ordering voice within yourself that gives you order about meaning and leaves you in an obeying situation. Because as an outside world unaffected by yourself, it's obedience personified. There can be no freedom whatsoever in such a world. It doesn't matter if you have democracy, it doesn't matter if you have gazillions of dollar, rubles, dinars, you name it, you will not be free because that world is always already decided. It doesn't give any room for freedom. And this is where we're heading quick. We have gained an enormous wealth during the last 2-3 centuries, but we've given up our most precious things. Our capability of being wise and intelligent, our capability to have our own very intention, and our individuality. Because this very model of an already established firm world with a order of cause and effect will block out all conscious choice, and it will also sort of level up. They say these fractions are your individuality, and it used to be this fantastic figure when you were young, but as time goes your individuality disappears. You are no longer a whole individual because this divisioning is dividing you at the very same time. So how absurdly it may sound, polarities doesn't give clarity, it gives less clarity. And just as the text that is kidnapped or under the stronghold of polarities is losing its meaningful capability or force, you yourself become less of a meaningful book. You get less intention, you get less of your living life, and that energy is seeping out of the system slowly. But in some ways it can never ever disappear. And I think that's one of the problems with the non-dual movement. I had a lot of contact the last couple of 2-3 years. And they try to say we need to make the whole thing whole again. In a way, it can never be unwhole. It's just not possible. It's not possible to weld two different parts together because they've never been separated in reality. Well, that's a very, very interesting thing. And the more you step on the way to the more vivid, generous reality picture or reality way of life, the more you gain the energy to do even deeper investigations into your own mind. And so this is my deconstruction starts both in the mind and the body at the same time. It starts both in the subjective side, and we'll be speaking about neurology, science of cognition, that usually is to 80-90% focused on the subjective side. Some of this are taking in the objective side, and that's Gibson with his affordances, but they seem to play a lesser role. Or you go to physics, where you have the opposites, where subject never comes especially into the role until you get into quantum mechanics, and the observer is there. But it doesn't really go into deconstruct what is the subject and why is the subject constructed in such a way as to give the impression or give the gestalt of a world that is automatic and ruled by cause and effect. And that was something that struck me when Sir Roger Penrose held his great lecture on his 90th birthday. It's just incredible. With Roger Federer, and it struck me that Roger Federer is collapsing the superposition in every position, but we as the audiences, we onlookers, we are bystanders, but not only to the game, we are also bystanders to ourselves. Now first I didn't realize that, and Sir Roger Penrose didn't particularly point it out. I think he has that understanding already, but for me to get it, it took Rudolf Gachet's book, and actually led me to understand deconstruction is a method even I can learn. Even me, a simple person, can learn how to deconstruct. I thought it was just too overwhelming in the beginning, and I was also thinking I cannot be given that privilege. But I start to realize it is not that difficult. It's much less abstract than I thought. And the idea of space and time being so abstract is caused by this distancing. It feels so far away, but it's dead simple actually. It's much more simple than the model we are currently inhabiting. It makes for greater ease, an easier understanding, and that led me to the realization of the bystander. And the bystander is also something you see in how can I put that, in the mirror image. Bystander, it's so to speak, is isolated reflection. It's only one side, which is part of the whole thing. Sorry about the bells. Them bells, them bells. That brought me back to reality, for an instance, which is also a good description. Once you're, I think, yeah, I got an idea there. Attention is also some part of it. You will see how the attention changes during the day. And when you're way up in linear time, when you are in this cause and effect world where all the objects are established and they are always in some relation to each other in a cause and effect line, the temporal time, you will also notice a narrowing of attention. And as it has a special look to it, it's like a very sharp gaze, really stare into something, and it looks absent-mindedness. Something that looks like absent-mindedness, not really present. And this over-focusing is also something we can ease out of. We can learn to understand that taking everything in, all church bells, playing children close to here, sun in my eyes, too cold weather that makes my hand freeze, the moistness of the chair I'm sitting on the bench. All those things come into the picture, doesn't make the focus less, it makes it greater. And that is a rather good metaphor for this other thing I was mentioning about the whole world coming in at once. The modern idea of having small subject to make everything sharper. You have anthropology, ethnology, you have cultural studies, you have history of literature, you have literary science. That is the idea of a sort of extreme four-handed. And the idea is the smaller you make it, the sharper you put in the knife, the more you cut it up, the more you're going to understand about that particular thing. That is the illusion. The more you cut it up, of course, the less you understand. It's completely obvious, and it's not even an abstract understanding. It's completely obvious because you cut your own attention. Attention is not something sitting in your head or your body. It's out there in the whole world. And having a predisposition to think that the world is divided that way will divide attention directly. It's the same as dividing your own attention. The whole system with 200 different subjects at universities taking away the knowledge. Of course, you don't have to believe in it. You don't have to follow that line, but it's so easy, it's so tempting to falling into the trap of division. But division is what's taking away the force of the text. Division is taking away the force of your direction in your body. And division is also making your prana go away, your kundalini, your energy in your back. It's making you unbalance, and all of a sudden this idea of subject and object being divided is once more even more enforced and strengthened. And one last comparison is that university in China, at least, they used to be side-by-side training of the intellect and the body. And often the body seemed to be more intellectual than the mind. And I think that is the third reason. I mentioned two earlier, and it could be especially good for you, Kalle, who wants to have evidence against the click that tries to stop repetitive learning. We don't want to do repetitive training with our minds because we think they are too delicate for that. But what do we do with the body? There it's quite all right to make repetitive coarse movement in the gym, not very sophisticated, while the mind has this position of being delicate, elegant, should not be enforced to repeat anything, should not be made to learn the Bible or the Quran or 2,000, 3,000 Chinese signs, which is the minimum in China. It should actually be just the opposite. Learn delicacy with the body, do it slow and precise, because at least half of the intellectual power comes from the body, according to Taoist, Chinese, Japanese thinking. You train precision with your body, and you also let the mind do the hard work by repeating in what Westerners think to be a mindless endeavor. Thereby you make your mind strong. Otherwise you're going to make your mind weak, and you're going to make your body coarse, not delicate, not be able to precision. And that's a division in itself. You do intellectualization by doing things in the world. Something that Barbara Tversky showed with elegance and so precise. She should have taken that insight into this outmost conclusion, but you can't ask for everything. It's not possible for a person to do all things. But it would have been interesting though, and that would have changed a lot of things. But once precision comes into the body, also precision coming to the mind. And once you do the hard things with the mind, endless repetition, doing the same thing over and over again, this strenuous hard work with the head will become as strong as a trained muscle. Muscles I should have trained much more these last couple of weeks. I'm going to start with sit-ups tomorrow and push-ups. But isn't it interesting? The body should do the coursework, and often repetitions in a way that is harmful for the body. And it's no wonder we have so much repetitive strain injuries in the West, because we treat the body as club almost, like a club you club seals with, or a hammer. It's very far from a hammer. It's delicate. It's the very ground of intellectualization in the East, and they ain't stupid, so to speak. Whereas also the mind can do the hard work, a mind that can do coarse repetitive work every day. And trust me, I've tried that for the last 10 years. It happens if you force your mind to do things it doesn't want to do. It gets much stronger. And even as I talk now, I'm repeating something in my head. I'm repeating all the different rhymes, 33 of them, paragraphs coming from Edva de Bono, and I go further. I also put in the Tai Chi movement from the standardized 24 forms. I can recommend it. There's an excellent YouTube clip which demonstrates these 24. And I also add the ventral and the dorsal. And I put that into space. I let the ventral go far way back, and I let the dorsal go to the next town up in the sky. And I also feel how that is easing up things, making everything more soft, and also soften up the thought. They don't seem as divided, because that cut up world, there is no room for a consistent consciousness. We don't even have souls to some extension. But trust me, the soul never disappears, it just hides under the surface. But it's a pleasure to regain it, because that is also at the very same time taking in freedom and your absolutely unique individuality. That is you. A gem, a diamond, just like the outside world, coming together at the very same time. We end up with a child here. Hello. Yasu. Tikanetes.